If you're an author or plan to be one, get excited because this podcast is for you. Book Marketing Mentors is the only podcast dedicated to helping you successfully market and sell your book. If you're ready for empowering conversations with successful marketing mavens, then grab a coffee or tea and listen in to your host, international best-selling author Susan Friedman.
Welcome to Book Marketing Mentors, the weekly podcast where you learn proven strategies, tools, ideas, and tips from the masters. Every week, I introduce you to a marketing master who will share their expertise to help you market and sell more books. Today, my special guest is Mickie Kennedy. As the founder of eReleases, he's dedicated the past 24 years to helping small businesses, authors, and startups increase their visibility and build credibility with the power of press releases. Mickie, what a pleasure it is to welcome you to the show. And thank you for being this week's guest expert and mentor.
Well, thanks for having me, Susan.
Press releases. I never want to assume people know and understand what they are exactly. So let's start off very granular and talk about what they are, and then we can start talking about why it's important for authors to include them in their strategy. So first of all, what exactly is a press release?
Press release is simply an announcement written in the third person that generally you're presenting to the public, but usually most specifically to the media. They may say at the top for media release, headline, city and state, dateline area, then the opening of the announcement. They're pretty simply written. There may be a quote that you might be in the first person, but I would say the writing is not very elevated. You're just really just giving people facts, top down, what the most important aspect of the announcement is, what your most newsworthy angle or hook is that you're trying to bring people in to read the press release.
Okay, and we're going to go into that in more depth because that I know is a really important aspect of the release, knowing that you've got that hook to be able to get somebody to read it. But let's look at, first of all, the importance of having a press release or press releases as part of a marketing strategy for authors.
I think that authors should definitely consider a press release. And I think that the advantage for nonfiction authors is it's much easier to get media coverage with a nonfiction book than it is, for example, a fiction book, because so many elements of a fiction book, you really only know them once you've read the book, like the style of the writer, how well written it is, the plot and things like that. But with nonfiction, it's a little bit more about expertise and what is the hook or angle of the book, what differentiates this book and its subject matter from all the other books that are out there. Also there's the author, what their story is. There's perhaps struggles or obstacles they've overcome or, just their journey that led them to this. All of these are elements that potentially could be fodder for a press release. For example, someone who was always in corporate America and then stumbled into a completely different career is now written a book about transitioning later in life. And that journey that they took can really be a powerful hook that people could identify with, because there are people who seem to always need a change in their life, and maybe a career change or something like that could be valuable. And learning from their journey and what worked and what didn't work could be valuable. So it can really take a lot of permutations as to what a nonfiction book could be about, but there's lots of different ways to approach it. And it's a matter of trying to just reverse engineer what you think a journalist is going to be receptive to. At the end of the day, they are gatekeepers and they're trying to decide what's worth sharing with their audience. And they want to be sure that when they share stuff with them, that it's stuff that will delight them or interest them. As a result, what is it about your book or your journey that would interest or delight an audience? And if you can sort of tap into that and build that into a press release, you stand a much higher chance of getting media pickup.
That is a critical point here, is getting their attention and finding out that this is something that they would be interested in. And having worked in PR and knowing how hard it is sometimes to get the attention of a journalist. Are there some tricks of the trade here that you could share? What do we need to know that would really help us sort of ensure the success of this release?
I think that being authentic, be vulnerable. I've had clients that share missteps that they've had, and often those are the things that get picked up. We had one who shared that they had to cancel their Thanksgiving dinner with the extended family, as all of them were doing fulfillment in a warehouse over Thanksgiving because they were just inundated with orders. And that was the introduction to the article about them in Inc. magazine. They really loved that little anecdote. And I think why they led with that is because it's something that a lot of entrepreneurs can identify with. So are there elements of your life that other people could identify with, or the subject matter that you've written about? Could people identify with that? There's also other different ways to pepper in some newsworthiness in a press release. The media loves numbers, statistics. So if you have numbers that back any of what your book is about, for example, in the example of the career change, you could have a quote that says, according to some kind of bureau, 64% of people will change careers after the age of 50. That could be like a really interesting jumping point into you, because all of a sudden you've made it very clear to the journalist that this is something that affects a lot of people or will affect a lot of people. And it really hones in the fact that this isn't just some isolated experience, but this is something that a lot of people are probably going to struggle with. Therefore, they might identify with this book, if not now, later.
What I'm liking what you're saying is that we're not focusing on, hey, I wrote a book about. It's more about some aspect of the book that people can relate to, or the newsworthy, or maybe it relates to, I know that there's these national days. Every day is the day of something or other, the popcorn day, or the chocolate chip cookie day, or whatever.
Right.
So it's tying it into something that is relevant, that is newsworthy, that could be of interest to the target audience. Talk to us about how to get those releases out there. Now, I know that your company does this. It's knowing which media to go after, because it's not just throwing enough spaghetti against the wall, hoping some will stick. So how do you decide which media you're going to go after?
I think that with a distribution through e-releases like we do, it includes a national distribution over PR and Newswire, and you get to select appropriate industry trade publications. You really want to who would be of interest for your book? What's your ideal audience? Is your book sort of about business experience in the fashion world? Then maybe business and fashion might be the two categories that you pick, or whatever subject. So you just sort of have to get a feel for what type of readers. And, the business one's going to include a lot of business publications and magazines and newspapers. The fashion one's going to include a lot of fashion trades, but also just newspapers and people who cover the fashion industry. And so, knowing these identifiers, industry identifiers, are specific to the beat of the journalist, you want to find the one that mostly correlates to what your ideal reader would be part of, what group.
Now, I remember that forming relationships with the media was always very helpful. Does that still happen today, or is there just no time for this?
Well, it is more challenging today. Some of your larger PR firms still do that, and they still foster relationships with journalists, and it is time consuming, but the rewards are when you're in a pinch and you've got a client breathing down your neck, you can lean on some of these people you have relationships with, and they might cut you a favor or say, hey, is there a way you could couch this to fit this? That's kind of what we're working on right now. That's harder to do if you don't have a relationship with the journalist. And I guess one of the things that I would say is that there's nothing stopping you from establishing a relationship with a journalist. I think it's good practice in your local market to build a Rolodex of local journalists or producers and bookers of TV and radio that cover your industry from time to time. It might be the local newspaper who writes on your industry or covers what the beat that would be closest to what you're about. You can just call and ask for their email address. They're not trying to hide it. They're accessible to the community. It's not strange or unusual to request their email address. You could also check Twitter because some of them like to be on Twitter, but I think a lot of people are hitting pause on Twitter at the moment. So I think that building your own Rolodex, if you have a business newspaper and your book would align with business readers, you could also reach out to your local business magazine or business newspaper segments. Sometimes there's spotlights in industry, or like they'll cover a new book, maybe a piece of nonfiction you've seen. So they're receptive to that. Then you could just call and ask who the producer or booker of that segment is and get their email address. And then once you have that, you can just reach out to them. You don't even need a press release. You just need a good pitch. Like, I'm a local author. I've released this new book. This is what it's about. Maybe put a really captivating quote in there. Quotes are really powerful because if you have a very meaningful quote that really has some pizzazz, journalists can build a story around it. So many quotes on press releases these days are safe, benign quotes. They can easily be paraphrased and there'd be no loss. So really spend a little extra time on your quote because it's one way in which you can really stand out.
Thank you for including the local media, because it's something that I often talk about here, that this is a market that's right on your doorstep and it gets overlooked because you're like, oh, I want to be in the big papers,
Right.
Something that everybody's heard of. I live in a very small town. There's one paper here in town. I've said in the past, I can send a release and the editor will print it verbatim. Usually the only thing he changes is the headline. I'm very fortunate, but you're talking about larger cities where, yes, you have different papers, some business related, and it's finding that journalist who covers the particular area, the arts or the fashion or business, etc. So thank you for highlighting that, because I think that is very much an overlooked market, but one that could be very helpful. You could be a big fish in a small pond there in your own town.
Right. And local media is some of the easiest to obtain because journalists generally like to celebrate local wins. And a local person writing a book is generally one of those wins. And so even if the time isn't perfect when you send your pitch, they may keep you in mind for plugging you into an article they might be working on in a few months. And reaching out to your local media on a regular basis, a couple of times a year, 3 or 4 times a year, is a great way just to stay on their radar and make sure that when the opportunities come, they will keep you in mind.
That's nice. I really like that. I love talking about mistakes, Mickie, and I know in this environment, you can really make a lot of mistakes. So let's touch on a few of the most common ones that we could get our listeners to avoid.
Sure. So I think one of the most common mistakes that I see with book press releases that come through is that it's really just trying to generalize what the book is about. And from beginning to end, almost, it's like they've condensed it to a page. Here's the book. What you're really trying to do is find lots of little hooks that engage, little bits of curiosity that will get them to say, hey, this looks like a book I want to explore. Rather than give them the answers, ask them the intriguing questions that maybe they haven't even thought of yet. And sort of, get that into the press release in a way that you're sort of talking about these are subject matters that are covered, but, I'm not going to explain what the answer is or the path that you're going to take. I think that if you sort of build it from intrigue, almost like a marketing type approach, you'll get a lot more people interested because journalists, by and large, are story builders. Most articles are written in a story format, and having the elements in your press release for a story can really go far, where describing the book in great detail isn't necessarily going to build a story, but your journey of how the book came to be, your past, your career experience is if relevant to the book. All of these things are the story. It's like the hero journey through this path. And I think that keeping that in mind and making sure you have those elements to build a story are really important. Product launch press releases are one of the most common type that we get. And it's usually just, here's the product and here's a list of features. And that's very little for a journalist to build a story with. But if you were to start incorporating it with things like, here's someone who used it, they achieved this result, here's a quote by them, that says wonderful things about this product. All of that with the product launch really allows them to build out a whole story arc and take the readers on a journey. And I think that you want the press release to have those elements of building out a story. What is it that, makes the book intriguing? What is it that makes you intriguing? Who is this author and why should people care? And I think that, again, these really great quotes that are either witty or philosophical or just extremely concise and precise language and just powerful will just add to it and make the journalist feel like, wow, I could build a really good story around all of these elements.
I love the fact that you call a journalist a story builder, because it's so true. I mean, they are. It's all about stories, but I just had not thought of that description for them. So I love that. I recall too many authors saying, oh, I just need to send a book to the paper, to the journal, the editor, or to, maybe somebody who writes a column, a business column. What are your thoughts on that?
I think you're just wasting a book. I think that journalists are so busy. They're just not going to have the time to read a book. So you're going to do them a big favor of making the press release a digestible window into the book and why this book should be of interest to their readers and what promises can be made from this book. What will they glean? Is it the story or is it the information, the way that it's told or organized? All of these different aspects, put that in the press release. If they find the press release interesting, they'll often write an article without ever looking at the book. I mean, probably 98% of articles about books that get written, the person didn't read the book. And maybe that's, a little bit of an exaggeration, but I do think that most people, just like talk show hosts, where they have people coming in who've written book after book, they don't have the time or energy or bandwidth to read all of those books either. So it's just, understanding that your expectations should be that you'll get a lot more mileage out of a very well-written press release than you will from sharing your book with someone.
Thank you for that, because I've often said too that, it's a waste of time. It's a waste of a book to do that. Let's talk about realistic expectations. So you get a press release published. Then what?
After it goes out, you'll get a report from the newswire that shows the release on a few websites, maybe like 100. Usually Yahoo Finance is there because they pick up all press releases, whether they're financial or publicly traded or who they are. I always tell people, don't get excited about the syndicated report because it's pretty automated and it happens with all paid releases. What we're looking for is earned media, where a journalist actually reads the press release and writes their own article about it. And those are hard to come by, but they are attainable. And I think that I had one customer who was a self-published author who got the front page of the entertainment section of USA Today. That's a very large get for a self-published author, but it spoke to the journalist. And it was about an action adventure component. And when you read the press release, you were excited and you wanted to read the book. That's the job of the press release. Get the reader to want to learn more and to seek out the book. And I think that that's why it did so well. There are also instances where trade publications could pick it up within certain industries, newspapers, magazines. I've had authors get on Good Morning America with their book. But they were published through a traditional publisher. The ones who are self-published, it's a little bit harder to get some of that national attention. But the person who got the USA Today is proof that, you can, regardless of your backing. And that has been an interesting journey because the press releases that I've always handled up until about 6 or 7 years ago were from self-published authors, because if they were published through a traditional publisher, they usually handled the marketing themselves through the publisher. And now the publishers are like, even the traditional publishers are saying, we're only going to do marketing for our most important authors. And the rest of our authors will publish your book, but it's up to you to market them. And so we're seeing a lot more of traditional authors through traditional publishers using a service like e-releases to get out there. And it is very competitive. And I think that, a PR campaign of 6 to 8 press releases is what I tell people to strive for. You want to try different hooks, different angles, different approaches. You can actually sometimes even try different markets. I had one client who wrote a book, and he has some anecdotes in the book about being an avid golfer, but he never intended the book to be for the golfing market. And so we tuned the press release for the golfers, and it's very clearly a business book, but most golfers a lot of them are business people. And it did very well. He got a couple of golf magazines to pick it up and mention it. So there are different ways to get there, but unfortunately, it's often not just one press release that does it. You just sort of have to learn from the experience and try different approaches and see. That being said, there are different ways to sort of hone what your angle is for each press release. And I do encourage people to take an audit of all the different possible hooks that exist within their book and within them and their personal experience, and sort of build a list of what they think the most interesting ones are, and maybe get other people's perspective on it as well. Then, go from what you feel is the most important to the least important, and then work on a series of press releases.
One of the things that you said, which I thought was really important, is this whole idea of trade magazines. Especially, one of the things that is near and dear to my heart is the whole concept of niche marketing. And then when you're in a niche, it's often, a certain industry or a topic within an industry, and then going into that industry and being in those different trade publications that cover that industry can get you a lot further, getting recognized as an expert in that field, rather than, as you say, going after the big boys and hoping that you're going to get featured there. They're not as hungry, from my experience, as often the trade publications are. What's your thought on that?
I agree. I think that trade publications are a natural fit. They are generally your audience, the key audience. So I find that they can really be a powerful resource as far as like reaching them and getting success with them. It really is a changing landscape because people are consuming their media in lots of different ways. So it used to be that there was just trade publications, consumer magazines, newspapers, but blogs came in, 15, 20 years ago. And now we have influencers who are using social media. And believe it or not, the Newswire has opened itself up to give Instagrammers journalist access if they can prove that they have a large following and cover the fashion industry, for example, or whatever industry that they're in. But the fashion's the big one with Instagram. So I think that niches are an area that makes sense because, you're drilling down to a very specific audience. And the people that read a specific trade publication are easily identifiable that they are within a specific industry. They have certain interests that are aligned. And I think that the same person who reads a trade publication is a reader and is probably going to be more receptive to learning about a book and perhaps buying the book as well. And so I think that that's a really good alignment as well, because if you're on social media in a niche, they may not translate to them being a reader, or even though they may be of interest in your industry.
Excellent. Mickie, is an opportunity for you to tell us more about e-releases and how our listeners can find out more about you and the services that you offer.
Sure. So e-releases has been around for 24 plus years. We specialize in getting press releases out nationally through PR Newswire and some email distribution as well. Our staff is made up of only editors. There's no salespeople. There's no commissions. So feel free to go to our website and chat or call or email. We walk a lot of people through their first press release, their first PR campaign. We are based on a la carte pricing, so we make it very easy to work with. No monthly obligations like a PR firm. And we're a lot more affordable than a PR firm. And we're considerably cheaper than going directly to the newswire as well, because we represent small businesses. And I've positioned to the newswire that, entrepreneurs and small business owners and authors can't afford $1,500 for a press release to go out nationally. So they did not run away, but found pricing that works for all of us. And it's a really great value that we give people by being able to allow them to reach the wire and reach the media. I do have a free masterclass that sort of walks you through an audit that you can do and build strategic press release ideas for you, your book, and also applies to businesses as well. And it's completely free, and it's at ereleases.com/plan, PLAN. I think that's a really great place for anybody who's considering press releases or they've done it and it hasn't worked. Because if you start with these strategic types of press releases, your likelihood of getting media pickup is going to be considerably stronger.
Excellent. And I'll put that into the show notes, Mickie, because listeners, that's really a real gift. So thank you, Mickie, for sharing that. Just quickly, do you actually help write the release as well as distributing it, or is it just a distribution?
We do offer writing as well, but I do challenge people to try to write the press release themselves, send it to my editors. We'll review anything free of charge, and we'll get back to you within 1 or 2 business days with our thoughts on a press release, whether you use us or not, whether you're a customer or not. My goal with e-releases is to be a helping hand for small businesses, entrepreneurs, authors, and speakers. And so we're very accessible. We want you to succeed. And I do think that the average person can write a press release. But that being said, if you're up against the wall or you've tried and it's not working, we do offer the writing service as well.
Excellent. So that's an additional fee for that?
It is.
It is. Okay. Excellent. Good. This is fabulous. I'm a firm believer in PR versus advertising. That's a whole other conversation, I know. We're sort of running out of time here. I know we could keep talking about this because there are lots of different avenues. So, Mickie, we always have our guests leave our listeners with a golden nugget. Words of wisdom. What are yours?
I think that looking at yourself as an author, you are establishing yourself as an expert or authority, often within a specific industry. And I think that as a result, the types of press releases that you may not think of are things like yearly predictions. At the end of the year, getting out a press release where you make predictions in your industry or a top 10 list of certain trends within your industry can go a long way. And having that book gives you credibility in the eyes of the media as well.
Beautiful. Thank you. This has been eye-opening, listeners. I hope you were able to write lots of things down. If not, guess what? Go in and listen to this again because Mickie shared some real nuggets of information. So thank you so much. And listeners, if your book isn't selling the way you wanted to or expected it to, let's you and I jump on a quick call together to brainstorm ways you can ramp up those sales because you've invested a whole lot of time, money, and energy, and it's time you got the return you were hoping for. So go to brainstormwithsusan.com to schedule your free call. In the meantime, I hope this powerful interview sparks some ideas you can use to sell more books. So until next week, here's wishing you much book and author marketing success.